what I've been doing for the last, well, 20 years or so. And, well, look at this. This is, I think, the intersection of technology, experience, devices, genres, places, etc. So if you have a short look at all these pictures, you have an idea of what we've been exploring for the last couple of years. So smartphones, but also apps, television, but also newspapers, sitting in front of it with a luxurious dinner. And all these people somehow pay attention to what they are looking. And that is my most recent project. And that is about what is actually valued by media users. And my latest article that came out 2 days ago is about valuable journalism and what we can understand by it. So I will talk about that at the end. First of all, even kijken.
The mouse that works with this.
No, it doesn't. Why? Yeah, here. How it all started. I think it started with a discussion of an understanding of soap opera, and in particular the civic quality of it. So why, and I think Jon Magnus and also Torger have also been part of that kind of research. So how can we understand how popular drama, soap opera in particular, but also detective series also have a civic quality and also have informative value for their viewers. So that's how it started. And that's also why I gave advice to RTL, the producer of a particular popular drama series in the Netherlands. And I also started to understand why game shows in particular, well, some people who are central to this game show, so they are either the presenter or they are a guest in a game show. And when they give private information, for instance, I'm a gay father, or I'm a, and they tell something about their lives, that more or less normalizes at that particular time what gay fatherhood meant in the Netherlands. Well, and Big Brother was a big event in the Netherlands in 1999. It started in the Netherlands and we wrote a book about it. And that was actually the occasion for an invitation by the editor-in-chief of the public broadcaster. Because what he had done was, in the Netherlands in 1999, 4 million people watched this Big Brother reality series. And that was a part. He thought, he was new to the public broadcaster, this editor-in-chief, and he thought, okay, if this is just an enormous public event, I want to pay attention to it on the news. And he did. He invited the producer of this series, and he also invited some of the main characters in the series, in the national news, at the 8 o'clock news. And he spent more than 12 minutes, so more than half of this broadcast to Big Brother. Well, that had never been done before. So one of the anchors decided to leave. The public said, oh, Jay, the public broadcaster is going down the drain. So he asked me, as one of the authors of this book about Big Brother, how can I somehow value quality as well as make room for innovation, as well as pay attention to what really moves our audience, because 4 million viewers watching Big Brother is an occasion. Well, I went to the broadcaster and I interviewed all the people there, and one of the things I found out is that there was a huge gap between how people discussed quality and how people discussed innovation. the only way innovation could be thought of was in terms of pleasing the audience, is in terms of trivialization, sensationalizing, giving the public what it wants instead of what it needs. So the context of innovation, the discourse of innovation could only be thought of in terms of that things were going down rather than up. So that was my first encounter with the public broadcaster. What I gave them in return was a more broader, more layered vocabulary about quality. And I published about that in 2003, I remember, if I remember correctly. And that helped. But nevertheless, the editor-in-chief had to go. So he was sacked, more or less. And his successor asked me a follow-up question. And that follow-up question also had to do with innovation. And innovation was now directed at reaching other audiences. What the situation was is that there were that young people between 15 and 25, decreasingly watched, read, or listened to the news. So in 2006, the public broadcaster would celebrate its 50th birthday, and they wanted to publish a book about it, answering the question: is there a future for journalism if young people are no longer interested in the news anymore? Well, I will give it some more attention later on. A couple of years later, the VPRO, that's the Dutch quality broadcaster, also asked me to answer a very fundamental question, and that is, if you want to continue our quality programs on the radio and on television, how do we get more viewers? Should we then popularize our programs? Should we do something else? And that's also something that we've been investigating. It can be read. It's in a book published by Nordicom about, and it's called Good Taste or Tasting Good, so that you know. Okay, this is the question I always get when I tell people I'm working with media organizations. Why is it so inspiring? And that's because I think it's inspiring for several reasons. One of the reasons is that they encourage me to deal with and to solve important professional dilemmas between quality and popularity, or between being truthful or engaging, or between having societal impact or personal impact. It also inspires me because they encourage me to look for fundamental questions. So not the questions that can be answered very simply, because media organizations already would have answered that kind of questions, but the questions that they cannot solve. And that kind of questions demands me to become creative. Creative in the sense of understanding and surpassing the limits of existing professional and academic discourse, and in particular also developing new research methods and research approaches. And it also demands to look beyond our discipline. And our discipline is media studies or journalism studies. And what I found very inspiring is that media organizations themselves more or less forced me, a much stronger word than, encouraged me, but they forced me to look into entertainment studies, in narrative studies, human-computer interaction studies, literary studies, cultural studies, gender studies, ethnic studies, queer studies, genders, and women's studies. So I'm a sort of, I know something about a lot of these studies. And one other thing that I think makes working with media organizations inspiring is that they force me to listen very closely to what is so fundamental about their dilemmas, and also admitting that I do not know at the beginning. So I'm not an advisor at the beginning. I can only give advice after we finished the research. So to not know at the beginning, I think, is an important starting point. Well, I don't know whether there are professionals in the audience as well, but I think it might also help to tell them why working with us, academics, can be inspiring for them. And I think one of the reasons that we are inspiring for professionals is that we may look for answers not to the question they originally posed, but beyond the initial frame of the research. And we also, and that is something that starts at the beginning, we try to reformulate professional questions into problems professionals recognize as fundamental, because they, the professionals, have to recognize them as fundamental. It's not up to us. Well, that causes problems, because what we find is problems that professionals hadn't realized they had. So they get confronted with new problems. So we not only have to solve the older problems, but also the newer problems we come up with. And we also find sometimes answers professionals don't know how to deal with yet, and help them to deal with them. All in all, I think what is inspiring for professionals to work with academics is that we serve as constructive sparring partners. At least that's how I do it. Right, some examples. And it depends on how much time is left, whether I will restrict myself to one example or also can give some time to the other two. Well, I will answer the question why investigating audience experiences is so essential to really, truly create the space to innovate. I have 3 examples, but I will first deal with the first one. And that is the one that I started in 2004, so more than 15 years ago. And that is an example about, is there a future for journalism if young people decreasingly watch, read, or listen to the news? In 2015, newspapers asked me to explore what clicking actually means and time spent actually means. I also have an answer to that one. And quite recently, coming up with the European sports events, the NOS Sports, also the public broadcaster, asked me to investigate the societal meaning of sports journalism. But I'm not sure I can get to them. But if you are interested, we can always have a chat afterwards. Okay, in 2004, there were some complications in studying young people's news use, and these were very fundamental complications. And that was that the method seemed to determine the research outcome. So when in surveys, people asked, is news important for you? Then young people would say, yes, it's very important. News is very important. But the ratings and shares show otherwise. No, the ratings and shares show other activities probably are more important or relevant than news, because decreasingly young people frequency. Well, the answer to that is that we discovered a double viewing paradox. And we discovered it quite at the beginning, luckily. And that is that, yes, young people recognized NOS News as a sound and solid quality brand, better than its commercial equivalent, RTL. And yes, they also recognized that NOS News delivered public interest news and were objective and had a distant approach, and that they explained also the high importance they attached to NOS News. But although young people consider news important, they sometimes said it's good for you, even healthy. And we interviewed 450 young people, so that is a lot. They also found it boring, and that explained the low ratings and the low shares. But when we asked them, okay, you find it boring, how would you like the news to change? They said, no, don't change it, don't change it, please don't change it. They were very much opposed to any change in either news selection or news presentation. And we wondered why, and they explained to us, if the real news became more entertaining, how would they know whether it could be trusted? In their words, quality news should be boring and grey. And on the other hand, they said, okay, if the news is very important, then we will know it anyhow from our family or friends, etc. So we will know when there is something really important happen. So we wouldn't have to watch the news ourselves. Other people will do it for us. Well, then the second paradox was that many of them, although they didn't watch the national quality news, they watched popular newsy programming when they wanted a good laugh or to relax. So they did watch other kind of news, but not the so-called quality news. Well, is there a future for news then? If this was the end of our research, we would have said, no, there's no future for news. Because yes, young people on the one hand said they find news boring, and on the other hand they said, no, it shouldn't change, because if it changes, then it becomes more popular, and more popular news we can't trust, and then it's not important anymore. So what we did was we invented what we now would call a non-news centric approach. Together with more than 30 students, MA students, bachelor students, we took 4 months to go all over the country, go to places where young people hang out, in sports clubs, McDonald's, trains, schoolyards, fast food restaurants, other fast food restaurants, shopping centers, etc. And we asked them what they found important information. So we didn't ask them about news, but we asked them about important information. What did they actually experience as so-called quality information? And what kind of information was it? And where did they find it in sports? Did they find it in human interest? Did they find it in soap operas, game shows, reality TV? Where did they find it? So we didn't care about the genre. We only cared about what they experienced as quality information. And what we found is that, first of all, information didn't function as a goal in its own right. So yes, it functioned as a sort of, when it came to news, because then some people started to discuss news, and they said, okay, yes, I have a look at news because of the quick updates it gives me. Yeah? And they didn't want to fall out of line with their friends. So they wanted to keep on communicating with their friends and their family, so they wanted quick updates. And also they want sometimes slow news, what we translated as slow news. They wanted stories that made them understand complicated situations. And it didn't mean that they wanted this kind of slow news through the news. It could also come from documentaries or soap operas or reality TV, but they wanted to understand how the main characters felt, what kind of experience they had when they usually came into trouble. And we call that body snatching. And what they also appreciated is the narrative quality of documentaries, so that they are the great production quality. They also acknowledged the multi-perspectival storylines of popular drama and reality TV. So they wanted to have multi-perspectives on particular events. And they also appreciated the direct approach and the upbeat tone of voice of game shows, and the sports programming, and also some activist current affair shows. So all in all, we could show the new editors of NOS News what may help to create a better future for NOS News. So what did they experience as really informative? Well, what we concluded for journalism, that they wanted a more inclusive definition of quality journalism. So a broader range of news selection, so not only public interest news, although it should be included, but also human interest, live reports, talker news, so what is the talk of the day. What he also wanted is that the conventional distinction between communication and information should be surpassed. And that meant, for instance, that the talker news, so what is the talk of the day, what people talked about, that may not be important, but because everyone is talking about it, you had, for instance, the Big Brother, then you should pay attention to it on the news. And what they wondered is why emotions should be dealt as less informative than reasons, because in their everyday life, emotions were important. If you get into a fight at the sports field, or get into a fight at school, or have problems with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, then emotions are informative. So not only reasons are informative, also emotions. So they want the news to explain when emotions are relevant. And also they want to surpass the distinction between extraordinary events, things that usual will surpass will come into the news, and everyday trials. And everyday trials, for instance, is gay bashing, or well, things that happen a lot but may not be extraordinary, but are considered important. And the next thing is they want more good news and good important news. Whereas in the news at that time, good news was considered more or less similar to trivial news. And they said, no, there is important good news and we want to hear about that. And not only the bad news. So what we came up with, and why I think our approach, so studying experiences and studying also changing media use, and I think in hindsight, I think what may enable us to provide knowledge about more sustainable, innovative measures is that what we dealt with at the time is non-representational. We had a non-representational approach. So we didn't only look at the content of news, but also at the impact of information. It was also non-media centric. So it wasn't about newspapers. It wasn't only about news. It wasn't only about particular genres. It was about important information as such. And that means that we had also a non-news centric research approach. Well, what is so important about this? And at the bottom, you see that I've written about it in 2006 and in 2007 and 2008, but also quite recently in the book that I wrote with together with Tim Groot-Kormelink, Changing News Use, Unchanged News Experiences. I very much recommend that one, by the way. Is that that only by using this kind of approach, so non-representational, including not only content but also impact of news, experience of it, doing it in a non-media centric and non-news centric and approaching it in a non-media centric and non-news centric way, I think is important, because the book that was published in 2006, so more than 15 years ago, it is pre-social media, it's pre-smartphone, but our first year bachelors still recognize most of the experiences. So they may not recognize particular platforms, MSN, for instance, but they do recognize the live world of our research participants. And the need for a quick news snack or to remain updated, as well as the need for slow news when they really want to understand from multiple perspectives what has happened. So I think really going into people's experiences can enable sustainable innovation. Okay, it's 1:30. Rita, can I still go on and discuss
Yes, please.
another?
Yes, please.
I do. Okay. 2015, we were asked by the largest Dutch newspaper organization, DPG, de persgroep in Dutch, to give them an understanding what clicks actually mean. So as everyone knows, clicks are supposed to somehow give an idea about audiences' interests. And the problem is that if you take clicks seriously, they point to the high interest of audiences in junk news. So most viewed lists, for instance, appear to be dominated by news about entertainment, about crime, and about sports. So clicking patterns have led to a lot of concern about the future of journalism, because at least the people working at the top level of news organizations take them seriously, and they tend to give less importance to public interest news, more importance to clickbait, more importance to sensationalism and fun news. And scholars as well as journalists themselves were afraid that it might have serious implications for society. Well, what we did was we wanted to find out what clicks actually meant from a user perspective. And what we did was we interviewed and observed more than 65 users. And we asked them to use the news they usually used and to think out loud when they clicked on something and what that meant and why, and when they didn't click on something, what that meant. And that proved a fruitful approach. So what we found was 30 distinct considerations for clicking or not clicking. And we divided them into 3 categories. So cognitive categories, before people clicked on news because the headline was unexpected or it was follow-up news. So they heard about it earlier and then they wanted to know what happened to it. Other considerations were affective. So it made them sad or it made them uplifting. And when it made them sad, they tended to not click on it. It made them uplifting. Yes, they wanted to know about it, but bemusement was also a particular effective category that made people click on something. And there were also pragmatic reasons to click or not to click. And a very important reason not to click was that it disrupted people's experience, their user experience. They were just scrolling along, and you know when you scroll, you want it to keep on scrolling, so you do not want to click. Another reason not to click is data heaviness. What we found out and what we concluded is that the concept of interest is far too crude a term to account for the variety of people's considerations for clicking or not clicking. So it did say something about their interest, but the clicking technology said something much more than that. But even if one aims for roughly estimating people's news interest, clicks appear to be a flawed instrument, and we call that the frequency fallacy. So an important finding was that a lack of clicking didn't measure people's lack of interest in news, and the other way around. Clicking, in particular when things were shocking or bizarre or etc. People were very much aware that it wasn't important news, but they nevertheless clicked on it because they found it entertaining. And three, I think, favorite digital user practices such as checking the news, monitoring, or scanning or snacking, they do not necessitate a click, so you can't measure them. And third, using users' browsing patterns appear to be more informative for how they appreciate news. More informative than clicks or also time spent. And finally, we argued that all these measures, so clicking, time spent, sharing, tagging, etc., should be critically assessed from a user perspective, because from a user perspective, they illustrate a different experience than seen from a professional perspective. For instance, the amount of time people spend on news is also a very popular way of popular indication of our interest. We named the duration fallacy, because experienced and regular news users will spend less time on important news because they are informed and experienced readers, and they are used to navigate fast to get updated. Well, there are other reasons why time spent is not a good indication of our interest, but this is an important one. What the takeaways from this project is that we had to develop new research methods. And one of the research methods we developed was the two-sided video ethnography. So we gave people a camera, we put a camera on their head, and that showed what they clicked. And we also had a camera so they showed us what the kind of content they clicked on or spent time on. And we also had a camera in front, and that showed us their movements, their emotions, how they held their body, whether they were curious or relaxed or etc. So that gave us an idea about the context in which people were or were not interested in the things they were doing. Right, this is the clicking research, and it's still used a lot in Dutch professional circles. Right, this is the most recent one, and I don't think I have time for that. But I think one of the things that we found inspiring in the kind of research that we've been interviewing 80 people about how they experience sports journalism, and sports journalism is the whole range of sports news, from live events until apps. And one of the things that we found is that it's very, and that is not new, that it's very gendered. It's a gendered experience. But what was not uncovered before, and that is something that if you see this, is that sports journalism is so popular in particular among men because it's a socially acceptable way to express their emotions. So if men are crying in front of the TV or in the arena, if men are exhilaratingly happy, if men are crossing along the house, if they are moving quickly, it is all, well, people will accept it as a recognizable way to express their emotions. And they wouldn't accept that kind of behavior when they were sitting in front of the news, or when they were sitting in front of a romantic film, or when they were we're looking at something else. So I think sports is a particular interesting genre because it's enabling men to not only experience particular emotions and explore them, but also express them. Right. This is quality discourse versus innovation discourse. If you want to read up on it, I wrote a paper on it, and it's Understanding the Audience Turning Journalism. And it's describing the dominant discourse from quality discourse to innovation discourse. And also, it's not only a positive development. As you can see, because the central logic goes from public service as the central aim of journalism, it's informing citizens, to entrepreneurial, engaging audiences. And it has an impact, this discourse, on financial resources of news organizations. So what you see is that 10 years ago, quality news, in particular quality news organizations, were prioritizing particular genres and approaches. And now they prioritize technology and artificial intelligence. So it's not going into people, it's going into technology, the money. And it's also affecting labor conditions. So 10 years ago, most journalists had a permanent position, and now there's a flexible workforce. And they also are experimenting with so-called robot journalism, so that they don't need any journalists anymore. The job titles changed. So 10 years ago, there was you were either a journalist or an investigative journalist, you were a documentary maker, you were an editor or a researcher. And now you can become a community manager, an engagement manager, a social media editor, a head of audience engagement, a web designer, a graphic designer, and a data analyst. And they are all meant to make a connection with audiences. So the aim of quality news was always making important news, and on the basis of that, gaining the trust of your audience. And now it's loyalty, getting a connection with your audience. The feedback that's taken seriously by journalists was originally directed at professional peers and editors, and now it's engagement figures. So no one is ashamed anymore of taking engagement figures seriously. And that is also, this shame disappeared, because 10 years ago you had to check them in private, and people checked them, of course. But now they're publicly available and they are visible. So everyone can see that everyone else has seen that some articles or some news items are more popular than others. So it's part of a public discourse. So at May Day, that was one of the main questions I said at the beginning. How can innovation discourse and quality discourse meet? Well, one of my advices would be to focus on what audiences experience as valuable journalism. And what I found out on the basis of the, 15 years of research is that 3 experiences count. And I integrated 15 years of research is more or less 3,000 interviews with people. And there are 3 key experiences that turn out to be relevant. One of them is learning something new. People value journalism in particular when they can learn something new from it. The second one is they felt recognized. They have the feeling that, yes, what I experienced, of what I found important, of what I truly value, that is recognized in the news. And the third one is it increased our mutual understanding. So they understand more about me and I understand more about the world. So this is the diagram of it. And this is the paper that was published 2 days ago. And it's called What is Valuable Journalism? 3 Key Experiences. And it's in digital journalism and it's open access. This is the last slide, Brita. So by the way, that you... so these are people's experiences of valuable journalism. You can read up on them. So this is, if you want to read something more about what I've done, I think the best book is the one published quite recently, Changing News Use, Unchanged News Experiences, with a question mark behind it. Or Understanding the Audience, Turning Journalism from Quality Discourse to Innovation Discourse as Anchoring Practices. And this is also open access. And the third one is also open access. What is Valuable Journalism? 3 Key Experiences and Their Challenges for Journalism Scholars and Practitioners. So thank you.